stereotype, censorship, prejudice, quote-unquote, white-on-black crime, FCC, confidential, quote-unquote, true or false, quote-unquote, fact or opinion.
These are the words and phrases we see and hear in news broadcasts.
Good evening. No backing down today by GOP presidential contender Donald Trump.
TV interviews.
Hey, look, it's Amy Schumer.
Movie reviews.
Baywatch is a movie that's actually in theaters.
Music videos.
Hey, I remember syrup sandwiches and crime allowances. Finesse a nigga with some counterfeits, but now I'm counting this.
And even common everyday conversations in our daily lives.
But do they really enforce censorship for its intended audience of young children and minorities? Does it impact or even influence our views and opinions about how we consume media? Let's find out.
Media can be defined as a form of music videos, TV shows, or movies and pictures or social media posts. They are just about everywhere from TV screens to newsprints to even the ever-growing viral source, the internet.
Censorship, on the other hand, is the suppression or removal of any parts of books, films, or information that is considered provocative, politically unacceptable, or a threat to personal public security.
Putting these two words together creates an issue that is still active in today's modern world of media consumption and factual information gathering, media censorship.
How does the media affect your life today?
I think that, we're all hooked into this kind of news feed, whether it's a social media feed or a news feed. We're emotionally manipulated by it in a way. I choose not to have a television in our house, partially because I don't want to be subjected to the kind of constant flow of news that comes through, like television networks. So it affects me because I have a phone that is connected to the internet, and so I get news updates, but I try to keep it out of my house as much as possible.
We live according to media right now. We're like a media-driven society. This is where we get our truth. This is where we get our reality. This is where we get our controversy. This is what fuels our inquiry. We're kind of driven. We're a media-driven society right now. We don't look beyond media actually for entertainment or news or truth or reality, sadly.
The media affects my life in a lot of different ways. While I don't really do social media, I do consume media every day. So I read the newspaper, I watch the news, listen to NPR. I also watch movies, so I'm subjected to the memes and commonly found ideas that present themselves in our TV shows and our movies and music and everything else. So it definitely influences me personally, and also influences me indirectly because it influences my students. And we have to talk about a lot of the social and economic and political issues that show up in class and connect with the content that we're studying every day in school.
The media affects my life today it's like a huge impact in my life because I use it on a daily basis. I use the computer to do my homework. I watch TV to watch the news, and yeah.
Well, I go on everyday social media, Instagram and Snapchat, and I text a lot and everything. And social media is generally where I see like all the news that I see, and where I like hear about politics and stuff that's happening in society. And so that's just like where I learn everything about like what's going on in the world.
Is implementing censorship in music and TV shows effective against younger audiences? If so, how?
I'm not really sure. I think that kids almost more than adults have this like need to know the truth and to get like the raw material that's uncensored. So I think that I'm not sure what kind of effect it has on young people.
No, I don't think it's effective at all. I think censorship just fuels people's desire. Well, first of all, their rebellious nature. Like, why why, or what is being censored and why is it being censored, and it just drives people to look deeper into those issues and get their hands on the media anyway, right? So I don't think it's effective. In fact, I think it's counterproductive, because it suggests that there's a reason that this material is taboo, or that it needs to be relegated or restricted to certain audiences, and I think it infringes upon a basic human freedom of just like seeking to understand or be exposed to what's out there. Whenever I feel censored, I find a way to get a hold of the material anyway. I always have, since I was in high school, actually.
Well, there's so many different ways to try to answer that question. I don't know that it is effective, and certainly not with the rise of the internet and how much access kids and people of all kinds have to all kinds of music and TV shows and everything else. I think once upon a time, censorship might have been easier on the part of the government because there was kind of limited items that they needed to censor and limited venues for people to get access to different types of art and music and culture. But today, everything's everywhere. I mean, it's all over the internet, and there's so many sites that they can't police and they can't control, and there's the radio waves, and you can buy original versions of music or download them or steal them. So I don't think it's very effective. I mean, if you were to just limit ourselves to television, we could say, oh, we don't see like a lot of pornography or violence that's too extreme on regular television shows. Kids have tons of access, and adults too have tons of access to almost anything they want.
I mean, I agree with that because, like, there's a limit what kids and teenagers these days should be seeing, because sometimes it could influence them to start doing bad things.
I think it's effective in the fact that it like shields their eyes from like what they would be seeing, or like their ears from what they would be hearing. But like the reality is that that's all out there, and so I don't think that by censoring like TV shows and lyrics, it doesn't really, in the big picture, it doesn't really do anything, because themes will be censored like sex and drugs and stuff like that. That's just a reality, like that's out there, and I think that by censoring, you're just like kind of dumbing the senses, so that like when an experience does come around where you're in a situation, maybe you might not know what to do because you've never been exposed to it before.
Does the words bias or stereotype mean anything to you when it comes to consuming media?
Sure. I mean, it means so much. I think that I would assume that what you're driving at with the question is that there's tons of bias in the media, and there's tons of stereotypes that are perpetuated. But kind of like ripples in a pond, they spread out through social media and I guess traditional forms of media as well, newspapers, TV, radio. And we absolutely see bias. We see journalists these days really taking sides and not even trying to hide it. And we see stereotypes about people being perpetuated, whether it's stereotypes about who's committing crimes, or who are the victims of crimes, or how police officers act, or all sorts of things. So yeah, I mean, I think that in that sense, the media is very dangerous. When the media acts irresponsibly and acts in a biased way and perpetuates stereotypes, not a good thing.
Yes. Okay. When I was studying language and postmodern theory and philosophy in college and in my graduate studies, one of Michel Foucault, French philosopher and master of linguistic arguments, one of the things that I took away is some of his work was centered around asking yourself, in this case, like the consumer, what is the function? Because all media functions for a purpose, and so there's always going to be a bias. In fact, it's impossible to avoid bias in media because there's always a function, there's an agenda by whoever's creating it, or how they put the components of the message together, or whether it's a product they're selling or an idea that they're selling. So yeah, media is always biased.
Yes, I mean, I think that the media propagates bias and stereotypes by sort of creating a narrative that for mass consumption that preys on people's fears, which I think is really awful. I think a lot of it is really exploitative, and they use stereotypes to kind of do this kind of fear mongering.
Yeah, I think especially in TV and movies, there's a lot of generally like gender and culture bias and stereotypes, and a lot of the media that we see on TV is like white men are typically like the main character, so that there's not much gender diversity or racial diversity. And then when there is characters of color, a lot of times they're portrayed in ways that reflect like the stereotypes surrounding that culture. So like people who look Indian, for example, might speak with like an Indian accent, or like people who are Asian are more likely to be portrayed as nerds, something like that. It's kind of like culturally biased in that way.
I mean, I guess, yeah, because every day I see on the media people judging people just because of who they are and what they are, and I feel like that's not really cool of them.
Why do you think the corporate media, for example, news companies, political government offices, would choose to censor information from the public rather than the media?
I think that would be because of image and controlling your image. In our sociology class, we talk a lot about the media conglomerates like Viacom, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about your guys' project here, is because we have just a few conglomerates or these massive international corporations that own 85, 90, 95% of media outlets. And they want to control their image, they want to control people's access to knowledge, because then they can use it as a commodity, right? They can sell it, they can package it, they can shape it, and they can sell it as a product to people to make money off of. And it's in their own best interest to make sure that people want what they've got, like a drug dealer doling out a little taste of something sweet, and make sure that people want to come back for more. And again, in order to do that, you got to have the right, the corporations, the conglomerates, Viacom has to have the right image, and they got to have the right information that they're selling. But yeah, it's definitely been turned into a commodity to be bought and sold and traded.
To create a narrative, and to divert attention from real issues. If we're focusing on a story that's hot in the media on one channel or across several newscasts, then that's what we're focusing our attention on. That gets the people's attention, and then we take that as truth. We don't question further because it's easy, quick, and now. What's going on? Oh, they're telling us this is the version. No one analyzes further or looks deeper for what the real issue really is. So I think that it's all part of, like, I don't want to say I'm a conspiracy theorist, but I certainly believe that there's something bigger at stake, where the media, the corporations, or the government, or the people in power are creating stories to grab our attention and divert that attention away from looking for other perspectives, other versions, other truths.
I think this has been going on forever. I think that with the advent of social media and people being able to take their own cell phone videos, the government and corporate media outlets are freaked out because they can't control the narrative as well. I think they've been able to control it when we didn't all have devices. And now that everyone can take their own videos and they can propose their own theories about events that happened, and there's this sort of there's so many different perspectives and there's so many different stories that can be told about the same event, that the media has a really hard time controlling what the master narrative, what they want us to believe, right? And politically, that's really complicates things for them. So if they have a candidate or they have an issue that they want to push, they have to create a narrative around that issue. And if they're unable to do that because somebody's taken a cell phone video of a congressman doing something, indiscreet, then it's troublesome for them. So I think that, yeah, they have great motivation to control what we see, hear, feel, and they play on our emotions a lot. And so it takes a really strong, independent person who's adept at research to find out the truth,
I think it's all about money, and they know that like if they were to show the news like what actually happens and what actually goes on, they would lose a lot of viewers because the viewers wouldn't appreciate what they would see on TV, because the world is just like pretty messed up in general. It's all about like what they can do to get the most viewers, and I think that's like the primary reason why corporate media censors. But I think another reason could be because they censor because of what they want you to see. So like maybe like certain investigations or like certain events that they might not want you to know about, they'll cut that out because they don't really, because from their perspective it's unimportant, or they just don't think that the public should be able to see that.
I feel like they choose to do that because like sometimes the truth isn't always the right thing to do. Sometimes you just need to hide.
What forms of media would you say you consume daily? Does it seem to be repeated information you've come across before, or is it something else?
Medias that I always use is always just my phone, like Instagram, Snapchat, and like other apps. But I'm usually using the computer.
Well, daily I go on Instagram and Snapchat, and I think that they're both pretty repetitive. I don't really see much new stuff. I mean, I know that like when something major happens, like the Women's March or like the Black Lives Matter protests, I know I saw a lot more of that on my feed and on people's stories on Snapchat. But for the most part, it stays pretty repetitive.
Well, daily social media, of course. I turn the television on, I listen to the radio, I listen to podcasts. I like to flip around channels when I'm confronted with something that happened in the news, because I want to hear as many different versions as possible. But it's interesting because now in the age of like retweeting or reposting, it's almost like people are satisfied to let that stand as the only version, like, oh, I read this or I saw this and I'm just going to retweet it or repost it, and that's where the inquiry stops. And yet never really going into depth into any one of them, I think, is one of the issues that contemporary society faces.
So I consume a ton of media. I read multiple newspapers every day, most of them online instead of in print, although I still subscribe to the New York Times and actually get a paper newspaper. I have several news and environmental and science magazines like Scientific America that I read. I guess they come on a weekly basis. I listen to NPR going to and from work. All things considered, other politically minded talk shows. I have a variety of news websites that I check daily to kind of get alternative points of view. I think that's important. So I read the BBC, I read Al Jazeera America, in addition to like the New York Times and the San Francisco Chronicle and whatnot. Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, as well as listen to NPR. So I consume a lot of media, but just not the same media that all of your classmates do.
I'll admit, like, I have all those news alerts on my phone because I just recently what's happened with Russia and North Korea, I'm sort of more attuned to the news, even though I don't know how much of it I necessarily believe, and I know I'd have to do a lot more research to really know what's the whole story. But I do want to know, like, if North Korea has done another nuclear test, I guess I want to know that. So I have this stupid alert on my phone that tells me, but it's not, I don't necessarily value like CNN or Fox News or I don't necessarily take that information and just kind of like swallow it whole without like thinking critically about it.
What would you do to better improve the way we consume or view media today?
A way to make it improve is probably just like not like stop using it on a daily, but like lessen the way you use it. Like take breaks from using the media sometimes.
Personally, I don't believe in corporate censorship. I think that like what happens should just like be out there for everyone to access, and then it should be up. And then in terms of like censoring like children, it should be up to the parents of the children to decide what they want their children to see or not to see. So I think that we could like improve that by just like not having censorship or corporate censorship, and just allowing parents to be like the source of censorship.
To make it better, I think the only way to make it better is if the consumer, which is me or you or anybody, always be aware, conscious of that there's a function and that there's other versions and other perspectives and other ways to look at that media stream, because it really is a media stream and it comes fast and furious, and if you swallow it without thinking, that's where the real trouble is. So to improve it would be to improve like the minds of the people that are consuming it. In other words, like just raise consciousness. That's the only way I think to improve it. Be aware.
I mean, I guess if the question is asking me if I had a magic wand and I could cast a spell, I guess I would say that for every hour of kind of media that you want to consume because it agrees with your point of view and your opinion, you have to consume an hour of alternative sources. You have to listen to other people's point of view too. If that's not really what you were asking with the question, I mean, if you're talking about just like kids having fun or something, I guess that I don't know how I'd really change it. I mean, it's tough. I mean, here I am anti-censorship, and so I'm sticking to that. I don't like some of the ways that women are portrayed or people of color are portrayed in the media. I see stereotypes being thrown around. I have some Muslim family members, and I see a lot of things about Muslims in the media, particularly in this country, that I don't like or agree with or think are fair or real. And like I would, I guess, change that if I could, but then wouldn't I be censoring things? Like I would be guilty of the thing that I don't want to do, right? I'd be shutting down people who say things that I don't want or don't like to hear. So I guess if I could do anything about it, I would just encourage people, again, to open their minds and listen to more, not less, and to try out new sources every day, to ask questions and seek real answers. And maybe that's something. We've heard a lot this year about fake news and fake information. There's some way to be able to, almost like you guys have those ratings on video games, label things so that you could see its degree of legitimacy, like how real it is versus how much smoke and mirrors it's based on, how much nonsense it is. I think that might be a good thing, so that people could know if what they're watching or reading or listening to is fantasy or reality. That might be a good thing, as opposed to just censoring it and shutting it down.
As long as we're not, as a country, censoring those people, I feel like we're going to have this kind of democratic environment and dialogue among, just sort of your layperson. And that the media, we're not saying like people get off Facebook, we're not pulling videos, maybe people are, but I'm not sure what I would do to improve it. I think maybe give those people a real platform for exposing the truth.
Even though implementing censorship in the media can be a deterrent in being exposed to explicit or sensitive information, it's still something that many feel is being overly used and implemented into every media we consume.
Censorship doesn't always have to be used as sensitive or even explicit content and contain some essential facts and important information that is designed from the public. Keeping the public from accessing these censored information makes it almost as though the government or news media is keeping secrets from us.
If we can lessen the amount of censorship in the news, media, or government uses, the whole world would be less eager to find that blocked information for themselves.
Now it's your turn to decide what will happen to the future of media and all its contents.